My name is Luke.
Yep.
I am the co-founder and CTO of ScreenCloud. We're a market-leading digital signage company. But here we're here with Matt today to talk about some of the reasons that, some of the ideas around web-based operating systems and why I've taken the decision to step down from my role as CTO at ScreenCloud to kind of focus on this area.
Run me through what you mean by that. What is a web operating system?
Yeah, so currently we don't really have a web-based operating system. We have web browsers, which we've had since the 90s, and they allow us to access web pages, linked with hyperlinks and so on. And over the last 30 years, we've basically built out web applications and ways of building web applications. That's kind of the life I've lived as a developer. But a web-based operating system would add the missing elements that an operating system has that the web currently doesn't have. Because the way the web is today is the way it's evolved because of the limitations we've kind of always had in the web. So good example is Tim Berners-Lee created the web. He was interlinked documents and hypermedia and links and so on. And in his recent work, he's been working on Solid, which is a way of, having the state for applications under the user's control, and then bringing the application to the state or the data. Currently on the web, the applications live on servers, and the state lives as a kind of as part of that. So yeah, basically, the web wasn't built to be an application framework, right? It wasn't. It wasn't. It didn't have a file system. It didn't have a management state. There's no processes. There's so many things that we have in an operating system for applications that the web never got. And yet, I would say that today the web is the predominant application delivery platform, right? I barely use any native apps on my Mac OS. I use maybe a few more native apps on my phone. But yeah, so...
And the ones you use are built around web technology.
Yeah,
by and large.
Yeah, by and large. Whether it's like 100% web technologies or whether web technology is being used to render various parts of it.
Right.
One example is like even platforms that have basically banned the web, like Apple TV, right? As a web... I'm not allowed to use a web browser on Apple TV, and yet the web browser is still there and it's used by Apple on Apple TV. Right. So you just can't get away from the web being part of it. So let's get back to unpacking. The thing I'm looking to build, or the reason I kind of stepped down as CTO of ScreenCloud is I want to, and the best way I can describe it is an open web-based operating system of the future. And when people hear operating system, they often think, I'm starting at the boot layer, and we're going to do device drivers and memory management. And so I saw someone tweet the other day, if your operating system's not doing memory management, it's not an operating system, which is fair. Get it? Yeah. Well, we have base level operating systems, and yet all of the applications are in the web layer, but the web is lacking the key pieces of an operating system. So I think it's time that we basically built out the necessary components of an operating system on the web, such that we can have a platform on which we can then load all different apps and so on into it. So maybe the best way to go through this is to kind of look at what's missing today on the web, and we can kind of break down all those different pieces.
Well, tell me, what do you imagine, right? Someone in an ideal future where you have a web operating system.
Mm-hmm.
What does a day in their life look like? You sit down, you start working, and what do applications have in that idealized world in the future that we don't have today?
Okay. Well, the first thing to say about that is, regardless of what operating system's running on my phone or on my computer, I access this other operating system through either an existing browser or a new specialized browser. Right. But I'm entering into it, and it's probably already logged in because identity and stuff should be part of it, and there's no reason to relog back in again. And then essentially I would get a web-based desktop running on all of my displays, and it could be running on multiple computers at the same time. And within that, it wouldn't look that dissimilar than the operating systems we have today. The fundamental difference is that the operating system we have today is built for you by some large tech company under their design, right? Whereas a web-based operating system would be built off web fundamentals. And one of the fundamentals of a web-based operating system is it's open and it's mutable. So there's a kind of, it could look any which way you want, basically. So I assume you'd have it looking relatively sane, but there's no reason. It's basically the Winman-ification
Of application.
skinning of that. And then it's always running. So the state would probably be on the edge or somewhere that's not on your main computer there, such that then you can go downstairs, sit on your couch, and then using it, pull up, access the same system through your phone. The applications you're running on your computer are now accessible on your phone. If you want to cast those applications or put them on the TV, that's just, it can also run on your TV. So all these kind of gestures of moving things between devices and having other people connect to it. The other big aspects of this system is because it will be running on the network, multiple users can connect into applications running on it. Whereas right now, an application running on my phone is only running on my phone.
Yeah.
And that's it, right? You can't connect to it,
right?
Unless it's got some sort of like networking feature built into it that has a collaborative thing based around the document. In this sense, it would all kind of be open to be shared by default. And it's just kind of a question of the permissions of whether or not that sharing is possible or not.
Yeah. We've hit some pieces of this today, right?
Yeah.
On the media consumption side, I feel like we're the closest, perhaps. I can start watching a Netflix show on the train home.
Yep.
I pause.
Yep.
I walk inside, turn on my TV.
Yeah.
It's running whatever platform. You start playing it there.
Yeah.
It's syncing at some level.
Can you give me an example beyond Netflix where that stuff works?
Right. Collaborative applications like Figma, perhaps, or Google Docs.
No,
and they're on the document level.
Right. You're right there. What I meant, I was just picking on Netflix because I think Netflix does an incredibly good job of that.
Right.
Even though, your TV, you've got Netflix on it and you can do this cross-device thing and it works well, there's only a sliver of applications that show you what that future looks like. I like that kind of capability to be available to every application. And also, when we talked earlier about AI and generative software and the fact that we're going to enter into a world where really like any software should be possible based on your imagination, that, we need a substrate for those applications to exist upon where these capabilities are kind of baked into the system and just there. So maybe we can get into breaking down the web-based operating system into its components and kind of what the pieces that make that up that would be necessary to add. Plus, there's always going to be problems. We have to work around or impediments to building something new.
Which, for example, there have been web desktops. Microsoft made Windows Live Mesh, I believe was the name. It's supposed to be like sort of a Windows environment on the web. There have been other.
Synology has one with their NAS that people will show me. There's lots of prior art and some people doing amazing things. I think it's CodeOS or DDAL. I'm probably butchering the name. But there's a developer, I believe he used to work at Microsoft, who's built his own web-based operating system.
Yeah.
And, he can run, in WASM, he can run Windows 95 apps. That's the original MS Paint.
It's
insane. And it's got all sorts of different, you have to watch this video. I'll put a link to it, and whether, if this comes out as a video, we'll put a link to all these wonderful examples. But it's very much a recreation of what we've got today as a web app, if that makes sense. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it's basically saying, this is what we've got. Can I recreate that in the web, right? Whereas when I think about a web-based operating system, I think of it breaking free of the confines of operating systems that we have today. So that's one is going across different platforms. So regardless of whether it's Samsung Tizen or it's WebOS with LG, or it's an Android TV, or it's an iPhone, or Mac OS, or whatever platform it is, all of it can be one seamless experience. And as I mentioned earlier, like the multi-user aspect of it, and multi-user applications, because while we do have some examples of that, it's just kind of not a common thing. today.
So we have three core pillars here I feel like we've talked about, right? We have at the high level, we have a sort of features as products driven interface where you tell an AI what you want to accomplish, and it sort of creates a mini app for you to do that, right? That is built on open source components, where it's able to quickly create and remix these features to create the thing that you need. And that's built on a new platform for your user data, perhaps login and authentication, that makes sure your data is there on the edge in Cloudflare or something similar, where it's fast and easy for you to access. How do we get there?
Okay. So we currently on the web, we tend to access the applications via the URL, or via Google link or something like that. We go directly to the application, and then we're in that application, it's locked inside a tab or whatever. The first step for an operating system or a web-based operating system is you access the operating system, right? It's kind of application zero, as it were.
Sure.
And then we need what we have on the desktop, which is a window manager. And one of the things I tweeted out that I believe that TLDraw or something similar to TLDraw will be the basis of a future web-based operating system. Because if you squint, a web-based whiteboard or infinite canvas app is basically a window manager. It's kind of the same thing. You can move things around, especially when you add multiple users and sync and everything else. You basically have all the components you need there to build a window manager. So that's one of the aspects of a thing you need. Is a window manager, and then on top of a window manager is an application framework. The web, we don't really have a concept of an application. It's just a website or a web page. The closest thing would be Chrome OS and Chrome Web Store. Although Google didn't kind of pull back from pushing that too far, and Chrome apps got kind of deprioritized, and but we don't really have, as users we understand things as applications, but there's no application standard on the web.
Right.
There's also no way of those applications interacting with each other. So there would be like standardized interfaces and APIs for what constitutes an application, how you would load an application, and how the pieces, like you mentioned, would be kind of composed at runtime out of various modules or packages. So for that, we need access to a wide variety of software. Right, it's basically a catalog of software, and we don't really have that on the web today. We don't have a web-based package manager. If I was to install Linux or something, and I want a graphics editor, I type in graphics editor, and in the package manager it would suggest GIMP. Right, and I'd probably install GIMP, and there you go. I've got my wonderful native application.
Right.
The web version of that today doesn't really exist. I might search in Google, or someone might recommend an application, but there's no real web app store, with maybe the exception of Chrome Web Store. But again, it's not the primary app store, and we don't really have a proper app framework for the web. So that's one thing that we'll need in this system. And it kind of occurred to me that actually the software's already there. It's sitting on GitHub today, and the JavaScript ecosystem has evolved over many years and through lots of trials and tribulations and frameworks and pain, to a place where npm is there's lots of good software on npm. We can install all sorts of things, and as a JavaScript developer I can go and find packages. I can also search from GitHub. If I wanted to build a photo editor or something like that, I could search on GitHub and I could find a number of different open source photo editors. But on their page, on their README, it would tell me I have to check out that program to my computer using,
build it locally,
npm install the different packages, run the dev server, maybe if the thing uses a database, initialize the database, and so on, right?
And so as an average end user, those are entirely inaccessible.
It's just the concepts that don't
even as a beginning developer.
Yeah, and each one is different, and often part of the pain of being a developer is dealing with these incompatibilities and differences of all of that world. And yet there's a massive array of software and libraries and packages are there. Part of the problem, because this software is really only available to developers, and the way we've been building applications in the past is we compile it all into a bundle. So we might take some libraries and things and add it to my projects and add them as dependencies, but then everything I get is all bundled into one blob of code, which I would then deploy as a singular website again.
Yep.
Right. But we need to break it apart. We need to be in a world of lots of little pieces that can be federated and pulled together. And actually, we already have NPM, right? And now we have JavaScript packages that can be bundled and served as ESM modules, which can sit on a CDN. And there's something like ESM SH that is essentially a CDN for these modules. And, version 19 of React, when it's been compiled, is version 19 of React, right? It's the same code, if you see what I mean. And many different websites. Like right now on my browser, I have many different web applications that are open. And I guarantee that like 80% of them are probably React apps using slightly different versions of React, maybe. But there's many copies of React as code being delivered as part of all of that. If we can move to a world where these things are like little modules that we load via the CDN, then we only need one version of each thing, if you see what I mean. And actually, there's no cost to delivering that as well. Okay, so that's kind of the application framework side of things, and then the ability to find software, to search for software, to find it and to install it, and to be able to find the libraries and things that bring those things together.
Yep.
And rather than bundling stuff and making it as a kind of pre-build, I think we will move to a world where it's runtime composition of software, which fits with the world where we might have AI generating software on the fly according to your needs, or at least generating the interface for what you're doing. I don't think everything needs to be generated on the fly every time. It seems a bit of a kind of wasteful way to go, but who knows, it might get there. But basically, the model has to change in order to facilitate that kind of composition, a runtime happening.
Well, it's almost similar to using GPT to code today.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily going to write out all your CSS for you. It might say to use Tailwinds, and it's dropping in some of their classes, right, in your code. And so perhaps if you can turn NPM into a package manager of sorts, and suddenly now there's a component here that does spell check. There's a component here that does text editing.
Exactly.
There's a component here that does PDF exports. And you sort of say, hey, I need to write a resume.
PDF exports are wonderful. Like PDF.js is a library that's available that can load PDFs and does a pretty good job of being able to load PDFs on the web.
Right.
That's an obvious package for the system, right? That should be usable in lots of other applications, right? And so any new feature that then added to that is then available to those applications. Large applications are just built out of lots of small applications or pieces of small applications. And if we're moving into a world of generative software, where, you said earlier that a modular system wins out in the end, I'd say that open source over time should win, especially in a world in which the cost of generating software is basically the time someone's willing to invest in describing what they want.
There's an idea, right, from Clay Christensen's Innovator's Dilemma, right, is that you start out with very nice products that are vertically integrated, right? Everything's in-house. And then over time, those products almost overdevelop because they, customer demands, et cetera. Somebody asked for this feature, you add it in. But most people don't need all of those features. And so these modular versions of it gets unbundled over time, right? We've seen it with cable TV, Netflix, to bring that example back. And now with software, we have that. Instead of, say, needing Acrobat to use all of its features, if you use PDF all day long, maybe that's great. But if all I need is to add one form field, perhaps there's a component.
If I'm a good example of actually in TLDraw, they've got the ability to load PDFs in, and I'm pretty sure they use PDF.js. I might be wrong. But then when you annotate on top, they use the drawing capability of TLDraw.
Oh, fun, right? Okay.
You see what I mean?
Mashing it in.
Often we rebuild the wheel again inside products as features. But in a composable world, that's not necessary. We end up with the best handwriting, or
with the best PDF,
with the best PDF-based library, and all these pieces can kind of come together. But it requires a different way of web applications being built and being loaded, and that requires a runtime or an operating system or something to pull those pieces together. Also, I think we touched on it a little bit earlier, but the AI can be this translation layer, right? Right now, there's tons of really, really good software sitting on GitHub, which isn't loadable.
Mm.
It is only, like what we mentioned, it's only for developers to build and use. That software needs to be turned into packages in the operating system software package type way to be made compatible with whatever this operating system's loading system is, right? And that work of taking an existing piece of software and making it compatible is, what package maintainers on Linux or whatever do.
Right.
And if you can just add a little bit of an overlay into a fork of that project and then add the code there that makes it compatible, you basically take software without having for the developer of that software or the team to care or know anything about it. And you've made it now compatible with this system. And actually, that's a job that AI should be able to do relatively well, because it's kind of the same job over and over again. And it's easily testable whether it's working or not.
Yeah.
Does this software support dark mode? If it does, then pass through the dark mode flag,
Right.
if you see what I mean.
Right.
How does this piece of software, like lots of software is, for instance, editors, right? Whether it's a document editor or an image editor or whatever, a video editor, right? Editors operate on files typically, or at least on some blob of state, right? They would probably somewhere in the API for that software, it's got load, load from JSON, or load from blob, or load from binary or whatever, right? And it's got save or snapshot state or whatever. But there's an put state in, get state out of an editor, right? Yep. The editor itself doesn't even need to know what a file system is or what it came from a file or whatever. Often the hooks there are kind of even higher level.
There are parallels in the desktop world. Wine on Windows, I'm sorry, on Linux, emulating Windows as an application layer. Yeah. So a Windows program can run and believe it's running on Windows. Realistically, it's throwing all these Linux calls through it.
And the madness of that is you can run Wine inside WASM, inside browser. So any of that stuff that is a Windows application, it's an exception all the way down. And
and it's the work you're seeing right now for migrating from ARM. Oh, I'm sorry, from Intel x86 code to ARM, right? Where you're running emulation layers. So it's like an emulation layer to a degree, a wrapper, so to speak, for the web. You're wrapping a translation layer. You're using AI as the translation layer here, and it's making, say, a React 12 component compatible to a degree with a newer React component. So even if this package is unmaintained, you sort of run it in its frozen state there. Over here with some newer thing. Pull them all together.
The question of composition, there's many different ways of composing. You can compose something, load it into the same DOM, same application layer, as it were, fully as we would a React component or something. Or you can load the thing inside an iframe, like fully isolated, if you see what I mean, and then add the code to communicate across the iframe. So there's different levels of isolation possible, and depending on how compatible those things are, or another way of putting the software kind of translation part for these different packages, someone described it, I described this idea to them, and they said it's like a Rosetta Stone for packages on GitHub. And I think there's something of that. Right? It's like, okay, all of that software is there. It's not available to people right now. But we basically, it's a bit like we have an app store that's sitting there ready to go. We just have to do a little bit of work to make those things loadable and provide the hooks in which they can then access and save state and so on. And break the things apart so they can be more composable.
And then if you squid, that same translation layer could interoperate with traditional web software that has traditional REST APIs, etc. So you're still pulling that data.
Everything that exists today still exists.
The things we love about the web, let's build on that.
Exactly. And the web is wonderful. And the web is one of the most successful things of the web is the fact that it's been backwards compatible. It's you can load a website that was from 1995 in a Wayback Machine. It will still render the same, right? So it's like the web has added features and added capabilities, but it hasn't broken backwards compatibility. And I think this is just another evolution of that. Okay, let's continue on the list of things that we need in this operating system. So we talked about applications and packages, package managers. We need like a file system, state management, that sort of thing. And I think that kind of breaks down into three buckets. There's like key value, basically, which is we kind of already have to some degree in local storage. But we call that distributed memory or whatever it is, or registry in an operating system. It's kind of key value for. And then you got file system. File system, from the dawn of time, has been the kind of crux of an operating system, and the permissions around files and how they're accessed. And I'm sure and all of that. And you can map, like key value easily maps to pretty much every cloud platform has a key value store, whether it's Redis, which usually Redis under the hood, but like they probably call it something else. And then you've got file system maps to object storage like S3 or was it R2? Yeah, on Cloudflare,
I believe.
Yeah, I think R2. And then databases.
Yeah.
Right. And databases are often a part of a more complicated application. And I think I would say the winning database right now is probably Postgres. But the one that matches best to this world I'm talking about is probably SQLite. Because SQLite, when we think about state, currently the state lives with the application, and it's kind of like you'd have a big database off the application, and then we build multi-tenant applications, right? Yeah. So when we do, on the Spring Cloud, our databases, we use Postgres, and inside we have these very large databases that can scale horizontally, and we can add more and more nodes to. Yeah. And then each customer's data is segregated from other customers based on the tenant ID, but it's still all in the same tables. And then we had to create indexes of all these table IDs, and it's isolated. Each customer is isolated from each other, but they're all in one large database. Right. Another model for that is just to have one database per customer. Right. Yep. But that doesn't work very well when you're running it on a cloud and you pay for every database. You know, in some customers it'll be small, some will be larger, I think. But if you flip the model around and you store the state and the data with the user or around to a central user, then SQLite is really just a file. You know, it's a database in a file, right? So you can have a database per user if you want, or a database per organization. And then there's far less data in that database. And it's under the user's control. So so basically key value, file system or files, object storage, and then databases. They're the kind of three, you know, if you've got all three of those, we can do most things. Yeah.
And it strikes me that the file layer, to a degree, we have is like a sort of a per access kind of thing, right? You go load a file and you upload it to that server and then use it there somehow, and it gets stored, and you have duplicates everywhere. The database side typically ends up rounding to exporting a CSV file, typically from a re-importing it. And often the translation is a mess there, right? Whereas if you have one database that's your data right there, maybe Salesforce is going to store their stuff differently than HubSpot. But if you squint, it's the same data.
It's enough that the LLM or the AI can understand.
To do the translation layer for you.
It can totally understand SQL. It can understand the schema. And actually, in a world in which we're heading, where you want to provide all of that data to your LLM as context, like currently, it's spread out amongst many different services online, and giving them all access to the same thing. And you know, many years of developer time are put into integrating these things to each other.
And just often to move individual objects instead of your whole scene.
We end up copying stuff to our desktop. You know, our current operating systems are like a temp folder for us to move data between different web-based applications, right?
Just like you never built that application layer.
Because we don't have that bit. But if we change the model and bring the data to the core with the user, then and the user's in control of which AI they use with this, then the user has the ability to provide access to all of that to the AI. And the AI can index it all, or it can modify it, or this, you know, can modify that application. If you want this application you're using to work in a different way, and if that requires the data model to change, well, change the data model. Right. And just generate a new version of that application or whatever. But it's not often the state element of a web application is not that complicated. You know, we might have tens of database tables or maybe hundreds in really complicated ones, but still it's understandable. And if there is complexity there, a lot of the complexity is dealing with the fact that we're making it into a multi-tenant system. Because we're putting it all in the same thing. So you know what I mean? So it doesn't need to be that complicated. And often a lot of that, like you said earlier on features, you know, if there is 100 database tables, how many am I actually using? It's kind of like, okay, the software can kind of shrink to the size of the user's requirements, as it were, rather than having to be one size fits all that has all potential features that all customers who ever use that software might want. So yeah, I think it's kind of, there were a bunch of things missing when the web came out, which if you view the web as interlinked documents and hypermedia and all that is fine. But if you view the web through the lens of what the web is today, like some real fundamental stuff was left out. And I think Web3 tried to fill
It was supposed to be this.
Yeah,
right?
supposed to be this, right? Yeah. And it was good ideas.
Right.
Unfortunately, it involved money and speculation and meme coins and everything else, and it kind of got a bit of a bad smell.
Right.
But there's good tech there, and there's good ideas there and stuff, but the adoption's not there. And, like you sit down with someone who does crypto and they'll be like, hey, I actually experienced a real world use case. In Telegram, you can send money to each other.
Well, but it's funny. It goes before that, right?
Yeah.
There was Web 1 is the original World Wide Web, right? Web 2 was a bit of feeds and early Ajax JavaScript.
Yep.
And then Web 3 and the sort of O'Reilly framing of it, right, was supposed to be more of the interoperability and standardization.
Yeah.
Of course, operating systems, Microsoft has tried this before of having more of a database as a file system.
Yeah.
And all those sort of got left behind or never fully developed. And then crypto sort of co-opted the term Web3 with some of the idealism of it, but not quite the same direction, right?
Yeah.
And so it's almost like you need a Web 4 or a new start.
Maybe we do. Yeah. We could just try to deprecate Web3.
Yeah. It was all a detour here. Let's get back.
It's basically like, Silverlight.
Full circle.
Yeah. But yeah, I think we basically need another generation of the web, which is centered around users and their data and is designed in a way that is kind of AI compatible or AI first, right? And it needs to be under users' control. It needs to be open because in my mind, it is not open. It's got no chance of really bedding in. It needs to be federated so that, it wouldn't just be, I run my operating system, I access my applications in the operating system. Things running in my operating system could be accessed by you in your operating system because it's all on a network, right?
Right.
And my processes and views of those things, it's this question of like, who owns the document or who owns the process in the first place? Like somebody ultimately, when you create a document or you make something, there's a concept of ownership, right?
Right.
And then that defines where that thing lives, like where that data belongs, right? And then, but that doesn't preclude other systems or agents or people or users or whatever from connecting into that thing. So I think I'm hopeful that we end up in a world where this grows kind of lots of different variants of these operating systems and so on, in the same way that the web did, right? We didn't have one web application framework, right? Jesus, we've got millions of them, right? We're 30 years in and we're still debating whether we should be using PHP or JavaScript,
What's
right?
the XKCD comic, right? Like we have 37 different standards. We should make a new one.
Yeah,
now we have 30
exactly. And it kind of feels that as a developer right now, we are. It's the most amazing time to be alive as a developer and to get to work on this stuff because the potential. I don't think we've ever been bounded on ideas. We're often bounded on execution, and now it feels like we're kind of going through the Super Mario Kart acceleration moment. But it's just it is that on an increasing curve, and so
Well, it's interesting. You mentioned open source, and you mentioned the sort of user permissioning or how we're sharing our data, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like those bits go together. Open source has obviously had a reason to exist for all of computing, but often it got tied up in the sort of the politics and money of computing as much as anything, right?
Yep.
But the thing that we all love about the web, and you've referenced this many times, is the right-click inspect element, and you can just change something. I've used this for the dumbest things of like, you're taking a screenshot, you don't want your name in it, you edit it right there, and it's good. That level of open source, maybe it's free as in beer, not necessarily free as in money, right? Where you need that for the LLM to go in there and compose the stuff.
Exactly.
Change something, take it out. And then on the permissioning side, it's the same thing. It's not open as in everyone has access to your stuff. It's open as in you can be open when you want it to be without necessarily needing a team.
Yeah, I think it makes sense, though, to be honest, if there is something that is closed and is a core component of this, that eventually an open source one will come along and be equivalent, because a lot of these things should be swappable. You should be able to swap them out, if you know what I mean. It won't be a singular window manager.
Right.
It will be a window manager that works with applications that have a certain shape, and we can have different window. I mean, people can create different ones, and this is kind of the wondrous thing about open source is the ability to fork things or provide alternative implementation. If you think it should be done different, go ahead.
Right.
In the future, you won't have to be a crack coder to make that happen. You just have to be a person who has a desire. Right.
Just think of the web already with this. With what's the original Firefox extension, Grease Monkey, right?
Oh yeah,
You
Grease
could
Monkey.
like
Yeah,
edit
yeah,
your
yeah,
CSS. Arc has that built in as a browser level feature. So
Yeah.
you want, to change the dark mode on Gmail, you can just go tweak that, right? We're still paying for Gmail. I'm still paying for that as a product, and I can go tweak it, right?
Yeah.
And so WordPress is sort of
Same
pioneered
thing.
this as a business model. It's open, but you're still paying for a theme or an extension because you want that thing. Maybe you could just copy it, but there's a benefit to paying for it.
Yeah,
and so there's still a model here where potentially a lot of different methods here could thrive. But the core idea still has to be you have access to the code at some level and are able to change it, tweak it, etc.
I hope there's like a kind of Patreon sort of thing built into this, because I do think people should contribute towards, the creators of art or software. But I mean, LLMs kind of blow the doors off a little bit of that, because they source from so many places that it's hard to say where any of that came from. I wanted to just touch on, you said earlier about, the right-click view source and making things editable.
Yeah.
And if it's built out of these little components, and, now we've got, I've referenced a few times ESM modules, but what that is basically a JavaScript package that's bundled in a certain way that the browser can load at runtime. And when it loads that at runtime, it can also swap it out for another one, a different one. So you can say, this version of that thing, actually, I don't want you to load that one. I want you to load this one instead. You know what I mean? And provided that piece of software follows the same interface and looks the same to the rest of the software, nobody will ever know the difference, if you see what I mean, in a running app, right? So you can swap any part of it out. And then in the world of like the cutting edge right now in kind of generative software or having LLMs write code would be something like Debian, right? So Debian, the way it works is it kind of acts as a developer would. So it would say, check out a project from GitHub, get the thing building by installing all the packages and all the dependencies, build the thing, then think about the task of what it's been asked to do, or what feature it's been asked to implement. Maybe it would write tests for that, then it would implement that, then it would load it in a browser and check it and so on. And at the end of that process, it would create a pull request, which is like a change description, should I say. I'm trying to not be too Debbie my terminology, and then which gets submitted back to the developer or the person who asked for this change to the software for them to approve or reject. But this, it's kind of like we're hooking the computer up. We're hooking the AI up to its eyes to be able to see what a developer would see, the terminal output of the application to be able to read what the developer would read, the browser so it can see what the output is, the code editor so it can change the code. We kind of using the human's interface to the computer to hook up the AI so the AI can act as if it was a user. And because there's so much, stuff on Stack Overflow and other places about how we build software, turns out doing it the same way as developers do is actually like not a bad way to get the AI to do it as well. Now, it's not always successful. It often goes off the rails and so on. But Debian runs in a VM, and there's a lot of hooking up screenshots of the browser and other things. It's a kind of heavyweight approach to that. And one of the areas I explored was, can you make that work in the browser? Right? So it's kind of like Devinception. You can, so if things are modules and they're small packages and they're open source and they contain the code, then any piece of that system that you want to change, the system can load that code and that thing back into itself as a modifiable piece with all the tests and everything and the build system associated with that. Using the tooling that we do today, modify it, have the user or the AI check that the modification is the modification that was desired, and then, save that and potentially publish it. So it just becomes it's proper inception in that the software will be able to load itself within itself and then modify itself, right? Which just sounds bonkers, but literally the pieces are there. I can walk through someone through it today. And so it just feels to me that stuff is now inevitable, that is heading in that direction. But again, we're missing the substrate. We're missing the framework to pull this together. I would hope we don't end up with one system that does this. I think what we really want is, in open source, it'll hopefully happen, is that we'll have lots of parallel implementations that will end up coalescing on the kind of key primitives that are necessary to make this really work.
Right.
Even a file system.
Yep.
Maybe a file system is not necessary. Like you were talking about Longhorn and the fact that they had a database as a file system. Right. Maybe we've got a database stored in the file system. Or maybe we always see things through the lens of what we've experienced in the past. And we kind of, in this case, I'm talking about a web-based operating system, right? So I'm already using, it's a bit like saying it's the Airbnb of something else. If you know what I mean, I'm already using an example of something that exists today to talk about something that we need in the future. That's not to say that that model is even the correct model. It's just a far easier thing to do is to recreate something we already have, sort of thing, and bring that in to, add those pieces, those missing pieces. At least that gets us to a running point where after that, all bets are off. It can just evolve in any which way it wants.
Looks like you referenced LLMs using, say, Stack Overflow to learn how to code the way a human would.
Yeah.
And yet, if you squint and look forward, it's possible to imagine new computing languages that are designed for an LLM and the way they would think. Maybe you get back to machine code. Yeah. But at a certain level, they maybe don't need our human syntax to write.
Probably don't need any of this web technology either. If you've got WASM, right? Literally, like WASM is basically machine code or whatever, or a low-level programming in the browser.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
So, and then it has access to the GPU.
Okay.
Right? So if it can render a pixel, right, and it can compute, right, floating point math, whatever is required, then all the other stuff, all these layers of abstractions and technologies and everything else, CSS, HTML, JavaScript, this, that, tabba, eventually, maybe all of that will just disappear in the same way that when we had AI doing translation between different languages, it invented its own language as an intermediary.
Yeah.
They didn't understand how that worked, but it was working. Right? Yeah. Like, I don't know how long that takes, but at that point, I'm kind of off the bus.
So let's bring it back to today, right? We have the identity layer that is to a slight degree solved-ish today through things like OAuth 2, where you can log into quite a lot of software today with your Google account or Microsoft account or even a social network like Twitter or X. It feels like we need something like that for files, for the databases, for the user data, as you were mentioning. And you mentioned that living on the edge, right? And reference, say, Cloudflare as an example of that, right? I think today of when you're adding a photo to an app in iOS, right, is essentially the app sees your photo library as a database of photos. Mm-hmm. You can choose the level of permissions you give that application. Mm-hmm. Contacts and calendars are done in a similar way on iOS devices. How do you imagine this happening for data, right? That who's storing this? Where's their data?
So I think of the data being like the first versions of this operating system you probably install on one of these cloud platforms, right? And so actually when you go to install it, I mentioned it running at the edge, but the one of the edge being Cloudflare or Fly.io or Dino or Fastly or something like that. Or potentially, I'm pretty sure Amazon and Microsoft will have their own versions of that stuff as well. And you could then choose which one of those you want to install the operating system on. This is like when it's a developer toy type level. I could also imagine users just going up and signing up on a website and not knowing that they wouldn't be installing anything as it were. But when you build for those platforms, or you build for, well, basically web worker type model, the code can also run in the browser. It can run on my phone. It can run on the edge. It's the same code, basically. Okay. There will be some level of like, it's almost like drivers for different cloud providers. So that's the analogy of the driver would be to the platform, as it were. Right. The way that the platform implements particular file storage or different databases and so on. So, but to the application, those things are kind of the same.
It's basically where your data's living, right? So you have this movable data, right? Yeah. So we're installing. I almost got a picture, a mental image of a bootloader, right? We were installing Linux back in the day, right? And it's like, I want my Linux or Windows.
That's how it's going to work.
And now we're like, okay, so I want this cloud provider or that cloud provider. That's where my data is being stored. Yeah. And then we're going from there into the application. And so now the applications are having access to your data through that.
The first version of this would probably be installed by developers or highly motivated technical users. And you'd either install it on your computer, or you would enter an API key for one of these cloud systems. And then it would create the object storage for your files, and it would create deploy the different workers and durable objects and and so on. So one thing we haven't mentioned here is processes. There's something we don't have on the web is processes. And what is a process? Well, it's an application that sort of keeps running that holds some state. And we do have processes on the web. They're running inside your browser and so on.
Or server side.
Yeah, but server side processes. We ended up in a world, we kind of gone from more stateful servers in the past to less stateful, and we went into serverless, which is like Lambdas and that world. And there, it's designed very much not to maintain any state, and for every request to go and fetch any state it needs and build up that view, render the thing, or call some APIs and then return it to the thing and then die.
Yeah.
Right. And that's incredibly good from a horizontal scalability point of view. And it's very good from doing like a large scale multi-tenant application that can handle spikes in load and everything else. But if you're working on a collaborative document, actually having one process that holds the state of that document in memory, right? Because memory, there's nothing faster than actual memory.
Right.
You know, it can save it to disk or save it to KV store or save it somewhere else.
Yeah.
But like the fastest synchronization point is in memory in that given process. And Cloudflare durable objects kind of point to a way of doing that. The way it works is you have, it launches that instance or that process in the closest edge location to the person who accessed it first. Well, the person who accessed it first is probably going to be the creator, right? And it can stay there forever, rather than having this world in which we design it not to have state to be scalable. Just flip it around the other way and have state and allow the people to come, you know, the different parts of it to come to that process. So if you imagine an operating system where you've got lots of different documents or things open that are different applications that are running, some of them we're synchronized through and so on, that would be lots of different processes running on the edge, but they could be running in lots of different parts of the world depending on who owned those applications and, you know, who's the primary point at which they're syncing through. And that's just kind of like adding that and, you know, whole processes can start child processes, they can fork processes, all of these kind of constructs. Again, I'm copying things that we see in operating systems. I'm not necessarily saying that's the way it has to be.
Yeah.
But when you do that, it gives you a path you can follow. And then suddenly designing a window manager or designing application sub windows or all these things become like, okay, we can just do the same thing we've done in the past.
Right.
Yeah.
Until you hit a spot where it's like, okay, now we iterate from there and you build the actual.
Then really, it's all mutable. So anyone can come up with any way of doing that better. Right.
Right.
It's just that it's a very different model to the way we've been building software for the last, web software for the last 20 years. We've evolved, but we've also, there's often, if the world heads in one direction, sometimes there's a point where you're like, actually, maybe we should consider the other direction.
Right.
You know, there's a lot of things in life like that, you know.
There's the quote about people who really care about software need to build their own hardware.
Yeah.
You almost can round that now to saying those who really care about web software need to build their own browser to a certain degree.
Yeah, well, eventually, yeah. I think that, and thankfully Chromium is open source, and properly open source. So thank you, Google, for that. But how do I put this? I don't want to say the web hasn't evolved, because the web has evolved. There's web technology. Yep. A lot of people have done amazing work, right? But, you know, web standards are a very slow moving thing, right? And sometimes web standards get implemented and people don't even know about it. And I think, you know, it's not been in Google's interest to kind of upset the apple cart in terms of how the web works. Right. And they've kind of tried with like Chrome OS and Chrome package apps and Chrome Web Store and these other things, but they've not pushed too far, because it's really like, you know, the Google-centric world is a world in which we all start our journey on Google.
Yeah.
You know,
search 10 blue links,
trying to get through the links that are all ads to get to the ones that might be real. Yeah, and that's been the way, and that's how everything's gone. But I think you mentioned earlier, we might be heading into a post-Google world in the future. And in order, you mentioned like maybe it'll take an evolution of a browser, and I think it probably will. But I would like to make what we have compatible with browsers that we have today as well. Not every feature can work, maybe.
Yeah.
But it's following that principle of the web that we keep backwards compatibility. We don't we make the thing broadly inclusive. You just don't ask people to adopt your thing as a starting point for anything new.
Yeah.
You have to make your thing work with what's out there now. One of the places where this is the most challenging for this idea, especially if you've got like a window manager or thing, is really the web's kind of lack of composition when it comes to. You have windows and tabs, essentially the same thing, right? And they're like top level, right? And then inside of that we have iframes, right? And there was a time in the past, a long time ago, when we had frames, layers, iframes. So they're all different kinds of ones, right? Netscape had ones that could load things into the current DOM. They had all sorts of interesting, and then we ended up with, we got rid of frame sets. And then we just got iframes. And because of web security and everything else, it's not possible, unless they're on the same origin, for, if I'm a web page and I load another web page inside an iframe, for me to even know if that thing is loaded. Right.
You as the item that's been loaded in the iframe.
The item is loaded in the iframe knows it's loaded.
The page it's loaded on.
Check to see if it's got a parent or not, which is often used to block it loading. A lot of things don't want to load inside iframe. So the code that says don't let, if I'm not the top layer, don't just die. But the one that's actually loading that thing, doesn't know if the thing's even loaded, cannot interact with it, cannot see what's there. And that's all from a kind of web security point of view, as well. But that's a very blunt instrument, if you see what I mean. And if I trust the thing that's doing the loading, if the thing that's doing the loading is effectively my browser, i.e. browser operating system layer, then it's no different than loading it top level in a window or in a tab, right? Because I trust Chrome to load the thing, if you know what I mean. The Chrome code that does the loading, I trust that. So that's an area where there is tech already in web browsers, which like similar to like a web view, which is the idea of a kind of window within a window. To the website or thing that's being loaded in, it feels like it's top level. Not feels. It doesn't look different, if you know what I mean. But you also have full control over it, such that you can take screenshots of it, such that you can inject code into it and do other things, right? And those things, being able to access the internals of everything loading at the OS layer is kind of, we need all that in the same way that we need the state to move there so that the AI can access all the state, right? We also need to have our hands or fingers in all the other things that are loading, so the AI can access those as well. At least my AI can. And then that way, it can truly understand those things. It's not like looking at a black rectangle and can't see what's inside. So there's a lot of web security stuff is there for good reasons, but it's also an impediment to kind of bringing some of this vision to reality. But you can probably provide one version that works in browsers today with limitations, and another version that works in basically a forked browser, using the tech of today as well. It's not impossible, and it's actually more just a matter of turning on some flags of stuff that's already there.
And then it's one of those things, if it becomes popular, it bubbles back up into the...
If enough people adopt it and so on, then but this, I go back to this thing of like, okay, we're going to get some generative software. The cost of creating software is dropping. We're about to enter into a read-write web, right? So is everything that we write on the web going to be inside someone else's application? Like, or are we actually going to get to play? A user's going to get the sandbox to play within themselves, or is it always going to be someone else's sandbox? It's kind of the kind of premise of it. And I think if we build it initially for developers, developers have access to play around with it, and we make it a bit quirky, and we allow people to explore these different ideas in a kind of open, collaborative, open source way, then the right way will eventually emerge. And if there is merit to that, then adoption should follow. We've seen it before. Like as developers, we built the web.
Yeah.
Right. Collectively. Right. Over, as an industry. Right.
And things that got invented one place became a standard other places.
Yeah, exactly. Whether even if it's owned by one of these big tech companies, whether it's Facebook or it's TikTok or whatever, it was still collectively a bunch of developers who put their minds together and took other bits of open source or whatever and cobbled them together that made those things.
Yep.
So as a community, as the generation that were born and built the web that we have today, we have the ability to get it back to a place where it's mutable and we can push it in the right direction. So yeah, that's kind of like, I think that covers most of the pieces of why this thing is needed and why I feel I have to go and work on it now. But what am I looking to get out of this? Why are we making these videos, right?
Yep.
One, I wanted to get these ideas out there because I've thought about it a lot and I could talk for hours. And this will save me having to talk about it at length with people. Hopefully they can get at least a taste of where I'm going with this stuff. But ultimately, I just want to put it out there and connect up with other people who have a shared shared mission or shared desire to get back to what the web originally was or what the promise of the web, of what the web can be.
Yeah.
Because if I can connect with the right kind of people and we can collaborate, then we can go off and try to make this happen.
Right.
And yeah, that's we're all going to be out of jobs soon. We may as well have a crack at it while we can. So until the AI is writing its own programming languages and WASM and loading it on the thing and some bets are off. We get a few years of interesting development coming.
Well, and the funny thing is the web did this to native applications to a big degree.
Mm-hmm.
And so if AI is bringing that to web applications, well, why not make sure that what we do is fun? At least have fun while you're doing it.
We have fun. And what would be more fun than people being able to, create anything that they want based on their imagination, to modify anything that they see in front of them, to understand. It's a quote from Steve Jobs I saw the other day on Twitter. It's like that most people don't understand that the world, if you poke the universe or the world, it's actually mutable. Like that, it can
make your dent.
You can make it. That's like it's possible to change things.
Yeah.
Everything that you see in the world was created by a human.
Yep.
Who designed it or whatever. Now that might not be the case in the future, but the thing that created the thing was at least created by a human.
Yeah.
And I think more than ever we are going to head into that world where anything will be possible. It's just gonna come down to whether or not you want to express your desire or your creativity.
Well, it's funny, right? Computers were a toy at first, right? Your first home computers were definitely nothing that productive, and yet they became a productive part of society. Web apps were the unserious counterpart to desktop software. Things like GeoCities are this explosion of creation and craziness that fueled a lot of the modern internet. And I think a lot of things like, say, WordPress or even, say, Facebook were inspired by original creations there. And you've got that spot again today, is that it's easier to code than ever was before.
Absolutely.
And that maybe all these bits and pieces that are laying out there that can be pulled together into something new. And who knows what people create with that.
Yeah, it's gonna be wild, and it's gonna be a lot of fun, and hopefully, my hope is that the web wins in the end. To me, it's the one true platform, and essentially the open web wins. We kind of so that's kind of.
So where do we follow along with this?
There's not a lot in terms of code and stuff on GitHub right now because I've only just resigned and I've still got to work through my notice period of 6 months, and I've only just got back to being a developer, so which means I'm a bit rusty, as it were. But I've got
AI.
I've got AI to help with that, and a lot of ideas. And a lot of actually other wonderful software that other people have built that I can kind of pull together. Because often what you do as a developer is you really just wire things together. Anyway, so if you want to find out more about this or kind of join us on this mission, it's CodeOS.xyz.
CodeOS.xyz.
Yeah, that's the domain, or github.com/code/os would be the other one if you're a developer and want to go straight to GitHub. And we'll be launching lots of more websites and little apps and other things. And the goal here is, for me at least, I don't want to start a company with this. I don't know if there's going to be a foundation or something else. I want to have fun. I want to enjoy this kind of process of creation, and whether it leads anywhere ultimately doesn't. It'd be nice if it did, but it's more about like being in the game and getting to play with it. And so I'm looking for other people who are basically interested in being on that journey and being part of it.
So I'm going to hold you to this. We need an elevator pitch.
Yeah.
60 seconds for stuck in an elevator.
Okay.
So we're going to start a timer here. We've got 60 seconds. Ready, set, go. What's CodeOS?
Okay, so what is CodeOS? CodeOS is the open web-based operating system of the future. It adds the missing elements to the web that were not there when the web was created. Things like file system, state storage. Essentially, what we do is we put the state and application around the user, so that rather than the user having to go to the application and the data belonging to that application, we bring the applications to the user. This fits the world we'll soon be living, which is an AI first world in which you can generate applications based on description of what you want. So yeah, it's a fully open web-based operating system that we can co-create together, essentially Roblox for the web. To find out more, go to codeos.xyz.
55 seconds.
Give me a few more cracks on that one, but yeah. All right. Thank you very much. It's been good fun. I know there's a lot to go through, and it's sometimes a little bit disjointed, but I'm glad I got it out for the most part.